I'm Catherine Franke. I'm a professor here at the law school and a close friend of the Center for Palestine Studies, and I just want to welcome all of you. So tonight we are blessed to have Hassan Jabareen with us. He is the founder and general director of Adalah, which, if you don't know what it is a legal center for Arab minority rights in Israel. The work he does is not about the occupation necessarily, but about the rights of Palestinians who live in Israel. It's incredibly important work that he doesn't do alone. Other members of Adalah are here, and maybe you'll welcome them while you're speaking. But tonight's talk is entitled, "How do the legal values of the State of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state," and you have Jewish and democratic state in scare quotes, "impact the rights of Palestinians?" Important and very difficult topic. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me about this issue. I am going to speak about the legal meaning of a Jewish state. Why it's a matter and why it's important. As everybody knows, one of the conditions on the negotiation between the PLO, or the Palestinian Authority, and Israel is the demand of the Israeli government that the Palestinian Authority will recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Netanyahu 2 years ago in his speech in the Congress said that the Palestinian Authority has just to say 7 words and the conflict will be ended. We recognize Israel as a Jewish state. So what's the problem with the Jewish state? If we can say just 7 words and we stop the blood and we stop the conflict, so tomorrow we have to say we recognize Israel as a Jewish state. It seems that it's very, very important to Benjamin Netanyahu, and it seems that it's crucial for the Palestinians, this demand. So about the meaning of Jewish state, you will find many, many different interpretations. If you ask 2 Israelis what that means Jewish state, they will give you 3 different answers. So now I am going to give one answer, which is the legal answer. Now, also if you will ask Zionist liberal intellectuals what is the Jewish state, they will tell you, well, if the idea of Jewish state is about ensuring the right of self-determination of the Jewish people, so I support that. But if the idea more than that, I have problem. Others will say the opposite. I am not going to speak about the idea. I am going to speak about what it is, about the is, how it works. And the only solution for me will be the law itself. What the law says about those values as Israel as a Jewish state, and why it's a matter for the 2 sides, and why it's become now its big issue. Now, before I take you with the law, and I hope I won't be boring, because to speak law, it's the most boring thing. But when you put law and politics, will become the most interesting thing. This is what I'm going to do. But before that, before I take you to the definition, the legal definition and its implication, let us speak about when this subject came historically. If you go to the UN and check all the speeches of Israel representatives in the UN, in fact, you will never find, until the years of 2000, any of the representatives of Israel who mention that Israel is a Jewish state. In all of their speeches, they will define Israel as a democratic state. And in fact, the emphasis was that Israel is the only democratic state in the Middle East. Besides that, Israel is the only democratic state in the Middle East that is under threat by the Arab world. The Arab nation threatened the existence of Israel. Was no mention for this identity that Israel is a Jewish state. More than that, if you go to the Israel law cases, to the Supreme Court decision, the Israeli Supreme Court decisions, and you examine, did they use this identity that Israel is a Jewish state? You will find that, in fact, every judge, conservative or liberal, was fleeing from using this term. It sounds as very exclusionary, ethnocentric, and doesn't fit the law. We are a democratic civil state. This identity doesn't fit us. We, the people who suffer the anti-Semitism because of our belonging. The falling of the nation state in Europe lead to the Holocaust. So we'll be the last people who will emphasize this ethnocentric identity of the state. So indeed, you won't find that. So how it comes for the subject? It came in the time of Oslo Agreement. Israel in 1992 passed basic laws. Those basic laws composed like Israeli constitution. In the 80s, when the rise of the Likud with Menachem Begin, this political party, leading political party of Menachem Begin, raised the matter of the identity of the state. But there is the matter of the identity of the state in the meaning of relationship between religion and state. What the status of Judaism in the state as matter of religion and not nationality. And when those two basic laws passed, Israeli Zionist liberal put this term that Israel is a Jew, the values of Israel are based on the values of Jewish and democratic state. Israel is a Jewish and democratic state, appeared for the first time in those basic law in 1992. But when they appeared as answer to the debate of the 80s between secular and religious group. The liberal came to say to the religious, Israel is not just a Jewish state, Israel also is a democratic state. So from this debate came this term. But in that time also, Israel signed Oslo Agreement with the PLO. And the Oslo Agreement developed the imagination of the solution. The solution, the political solution, will be based on two states for two people. So now, if this will be the final result of this conflict, two states for two people, and now we as Israeli are not surrounded with the Arab nation who threaten our existence, because Oslo Agreement opened another agreements with Jordan, strengthening the agreement with Egypt, open borders with some of the Arab nation. The Arab boycott ended, and the market with the Arab nation opened. So it's not as before the Arab nation want to destroy us. So the emphasis moved from the existence to the essence. From we are under threat to now time to emphasize our identity. Now the solution, the imagination that the solution will be based in two states for two people, move the debate and making Israel as a Jewish state not on the meaning of the 80s as the relationship between religion and state, but a Jewish state for the Jewish people. And now we will see what the court's saying about this there. So the Israeli liberal Zionists started to emphasize the identity of Israel as a Jewish state more than the religious groups. The religious groups, they say, I don't need to emphasize that. I am rooted here. I am having history for 2000. I don't have to emphasize the values of Israel as Jewish and democratic state. The Israel liberals, why they are the group that start to emphasize it? Because they are against the occupation. Now, if you are against the occupation of West Bank and Gaza, and you want to convince the Israeli public that occupation is bad, so in order to keep Israel as a Jewish and democracy, we have to get rid from the occupation, because the occupation will put for us two options: either apartheid state or losing Israel as a Jewish state. State for all of it. So in fact, the Zionist liberals start to emphasize the identity of the Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. The right wing don't need that. The right wing say, we are here, we came back, it doesn't matter for us any constitutional definition, we are here because of the history. But lately, the right wing start to use the rhetoric of the liberals, and we find that Netanyahu himself asking the PLO to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Now, what that means, Jewish and democratic state, based on the law? So I said that this term is new. Just in 1992, it became, before it wasn't exist. You will ask me how Israel kept its identity as Jewish state without the law. You will ask me that in the end, okay? Now, in 2002, I found myself standing before 9 justices of the Supreme Court, defending Arab political party who run for the Knesset, for the election, national election, and the Attorney General of the state asked to disqualify this political party from running to the Knesset. Why to disqualify this political party? Because its leader, his name Azmi Bishara, Palestinian and Arab intellectuals, claim and demand and advocate for a state for all of its citizens. He advocates for full equality between Arab and Jews in Israel. So what's the problem to advocate for full equality? Well, if you advocate based on the Attorney General for full equality, that means that you don't recognize Israel as a Jewish state. So the case became before Israel's Supreme Court with one of the widest panel. And now the Supreme Court has to define what's the meaning for the first time. What exactly the meaning of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state? I think the justices didn't need that case. The Attorney General of the state pushed them to decide this case. To note why the Attorney General asked this demand, because there is an amendment of one of the laws of the election said if any list negate the definition of Israel as Jewish and democratic, won't be allowed to run for the national election. So there is a law against me. What I will do? What I will do in this situation when the law said if the list negate the definition of Israel as Jewish and democratic state, won't run for the Knesset. And this man, Azmi Bishara, every day say, I am against the definition of Israel as Jewish state, and I challenge the state because I am claiming for a state for all of its citizens. I challenge the Zionism. I challenge the ideology. What I will say in the court, he is saying that every day. So lawyers are the most pragmatical people. You know, they have to find solution for every case. So I said, I have to give interpretation to the meaning of Jewish and democratic state that my client will live with it. Because if you are a lawyer, you might win the case and he will lose the election if you argue something against his belief. So I said, honors, if any political party recognize the right of Israeli Jews for self-determination in this country, that means that they should pass and allow to run for the Knesset. And the interpretation of this phrase should be limited to recognizing the right of self-determination of Israeli Jews. And Mr. Bshara has no problem to recognize, he believes that morally it should be recognized because he is not against the existence of the people here. And he is not against the right of the people to exercise their cultural rights, using Hebrew as official language, Judaism as official language. The national holidays of the country also be Jewish. All what he demands, equality with that, also for the Palestinian citizens of Israel who compose 1/5 of the population. The Hebrew is official language also to recognize the Arabic as official language. So if he recognizes the right of self-determination of Israeli Jews, he should pass. The Supreme Court said to me, in your slang, forgot it. This is not the meaning of Jewish and democratic state. The meaning of Jewish democratic state is that this state is the state for the Jewish people wherever they are. That means every Jewish person in the world will be allowed and entitled to be a citizen of Israel when he or she wishes to be, based on the law of return. That means also based on the law of return. If any member of this Jewish person who is not Jewish and want to be citizen of Israel, he could be automatically a citizen of Israel. Jewish state means that the majority of the population should be and continue to be a Jewish population. Jewish state means, now I won't have problem with all what they are going to say, that in this state the Hebrew is official language and leading language. And the symbols of the state are Jewish and Israeli symbols. And the Jewish heritage is one of the sources of Israeli law. Where is the problem of this definition for the Palestinians? The Palestinians, and I as argue, I have no problem with the Hebrew language. I have no problem with the cultural aspect, with the symbols also of the state, with Judaism. In fact, I am a bilingual person. I am not just Arabic speaker. I am also Hebrew speaker. And my Hebrew better than 90% of the Israeli Jews. And you know what? I have no alienation to the Hebrew language. And somehow I have intimacy with the language. In fact, I don't have the problem of Soweto in South Africa in '76 when the Afrikaner asked them to study in Afrikaner and they started their intifada. Why? Because in '48 we lost everything and we became Hebrew speakers because the demography and the language was changed in that time. So we don't have any problem with all of these cultural characters of the state. And in fact, the Palestinians in Israel, I think, and I will take the risk to say, that this is the only group among the Arab nation that recognize the right of self-determination of Israeli Jews. There is no any group among the Arab nations that recognize, and I will come to that point, the right of self-determination of Israeli Jews. But at the same time, they are the same, the only group, or not the only, the most radical group who struggle against this definition of Israel as Jewish and democratic state. So where is the problem by what the court say? About the law of return and the demography. Now the law of return and demography, meaning together, negating the right of the Palestinian refugees to return. But it's more than that. It's also to negate the right of family unification of Palestinian citizens of Israel. Family unification. Why? Because family unification of Palestinian citizens of Israel is perceived as part of exercising the right of return of Palestinian refugees. And this concept of the right of return of Palestinian refugees negates Israel as Jewish state in the meaning that the majority of Israel should be a Jewish majority. So it became like belief and faith among among the overwhelming of Israelis, that the right of return of Palestinians against our security, against our being. We cannot exercise our right for self-determination if we recognize the right of return. So demography became security. The term of demography is not about exercising right of self-determination, became also about our security. So it's easy to negate the right of family unification of Palestinian citizens of Israel. Now, one of the cases that I had lately, and we will have the evidence about it, about this right, like if Palestinian citizens of Israel will marry Palestinian woman or woman to man from Ramallah, they won't be allowed to live in Israel based on the law because there is no family unification. And this law was expanded in 2007 to add more prohibition that I won't be allowed also to have family unification with any person who has Iranian, Syrian, Iraqi, and Lebanese origin, because those states are defined as enemy state. Now that means that if I meet American woman, she was born in America, but originally her parents from Lebanon, and she teaches here, we cannot live together in Israel as family. So this concept of law of return is not just about immigration of Jews. It's about also negating the right of the other. So here we have a problem with citizenship. The right of equal citizenship in Israel is not imagined right. What I mean is not imagined right. I argue this case about family unification before 11 justices, right? Not 9 justices. 11. Well, this is the widest panel. In all the argument in this case, I found myself that I didn't mention the word equality in citizenship. I found that no one of the justices emphasized or mentioned the word equality in citizenship. I realized that later. I said, what? I didn't argue equality. I argue just the right of family, that Palestinians have right of family life. But you know why I didn't? Because my legal consciousness cannot imagine this right. I am Israeli legal product person. Because in order to imagine this right, I have to bring the law of return. And I have to say that the law of return discriminates between Arab and Jews. And if I bring that, it will be trouble, because this law of return is like holy. You cannot compare any group. And this is why in this case, the court was divided, 6 against us and 5 with us. None of the 5 justices of the minority mentioned that here a problem of equality, because this right is not imagined. In order to imagine that, you have to see Palestinians and Jews in Israel are equal in citizenship. But from the beginning, they are not equal, because you get the right of return. How they could be equal? So from the beginning, you don't have that. So you have problem of citizenship. But it goes also to territoriality. If you negate the right of Palestinians to return, that means that you confiscate their property, their land, in order to establish the state. How this affects the Palestinian citizens of Israel? I don't want now to go with all the issues of land laws, but of course, because here the ethnicity is the main factor and not the citizenship. Not because I am citizen, I will be privileged or affected, because equal citizenship is not exist. So my belonging will become a matter here. As the property of Palestinian refugees is confiscated, this means also my property as Palestinian also will be under risk and be confiscated. And this is why 76% of the private land of the Palestinian citizens in Israel were confiscated, and no one thinking about returning this land. 1/4 of the population of the Palestinian citizens of Israel are considered as uprooted or internal displaced persons. We have another term, uprooted villages. 1/4 of the population. Now you might be, and this is the magic of Israel, you might be Palestinian Supreme Court Justice. And you might be the only Palestinian Supreme Court Justice who can be partner of a decision to give orders to the IDF, and even to decide that the prime minister should leave his office. Or maybe we should decide that sometime a military operation should be stopped, or the wall should be moved. But this justice, he himself is defined as absentee person. Because there is a law saying absentee property, that means everyone who left the country after the establishment of Israel, even for 1 day, he will consider as absentee, and all of his property is confiscated. He left in that time in Lebanon, he and his family. So he's absentee. And he can be, you can be soldier in Israeli army, but you won't be allowed to come back to your village, because you are uprooted village. And if we give you back your village, that means that we recognize the right of return of the Palestinian. We don't want to create precedent. So what's the meaning of asking the Palestinian to recognize Israel as Jewish state? That means to accept the laws of citizenship and territoriality, and put the territoriality and citizenship together. What that means for the Palestinian people is what means Nakba. The Nakba of the Palestinian people is about losing their homeland. Territoriality, the laws of territoriality, the laws of citizenship are about the loss of Palestinians for their homeland. Because you cannot have right of return, and you don't have family unification, and you are not treated as equal citizens. This is why Palestinians will never recognize this issue, because in order to recognize that, they have to negate their tragedy. And we don't know in the modern history any people that negate or agree to negate their tragedy. This is why Netanyahu, when he spoke in the Congress and said, if the PA says 7 words, we recognize Israel as a Jewish state, no problem, he will give him any state that he wants. Anything that he wants. Because he knows that this is negating her. So I am against the definition of Israel as a Jewish state, not because I am against self-determination of Israeli Jews. I am one of the advocates for that. I am speaking that in Cairo, in Bir Zayt, in everywhere, because I believe in that more. I am against that because of those controlling laws and because it negates the Nakba. Negating the Nakba in this aspect is not matter of discrimination. Because Palestinian refugee in Lebanon cannot say the Israelis don't discriminate against me because he's not citizen to say that. It's about human dignity. So it's not easy to compromise the subject of human dignity. I will end here. Okay, thank you.
Wow, that was breathless. Thank you so much. So much to think about. I was going down a path in my own mind about the difference between equality and fundamental rights and strategies, strategic choices you made in arguing before the court to background equality claims, whether it was based to your own psychic crisis or a more principled strategic decision, and to foreground fundamental rights claims to family, to belonging, to property, to political participation. And then you took us somewhere else there at the end that makes me want to also think about whether one can chip away at the Nakba or the denial of the Nakba in Israeli domestic legal fora, or whether it's something that has to be addressed in one as a whole.
In fact, thank you for this question. In fact, there is a new law in Israel which was enacted in 2011. It's called the Nakba law. Now, what's good in that law that many Israelis, they didn't know what Nakba after enacting this law. Everyone today knows what the Nakba is. This was a gift. So what this law said, that this law say any association which is funded by the state and memorize and commemorate the Independent Day of Israel as Nakba Day, meaning tragedy or catastrophe day, or negate the definition of Israel as Jewish and democratic state, will face finance sanction and cutting in their budgets. So this law, in fact, this law, the only law which brought the Nakba directly and its face to the Israeli legal system. And we submit petition against this law, and we argue that, in fact, this law violates the right of freedom of expression. And also, we raise the issue that this law is attempting to regulate and to police the Palestinian identity, and in fact, limit them to speak about their narrative freely. The state, in fact, gave very strange answer that they said, well, in fact, we are not going to punish any person who speak about the Nakba or have any action to memorize the Nakba. All what we are going to do, that not to give them budgets and to cut their budgets. So the law used there didn't use the term Nakba. What's the term that they use exactly, if you remember? Mourning. They said if anyone memorized or memorize the day, the Independent Day of Israel as a mourning day, meaning Nakba, will be sanctioned. So we asked, in fact, I argue that this law is not law. I said, what's the meaning of mourning? How the law will regulate the mourning? I say law should be clear. This law is not law. So let us cancel it, because otherwise it will give wide discretion for the authorities, and we will move from rule of law to rule of men. We want to know what's the meaning of mourning now. Now there is embarrassing. Unless you say we mean Nakba, no one will understand you. But to say the word Nakba, that means that you recognize that there is something called Nakba in the law, and the state cannot do that. So they have to define what the meaning of mourning. So we discussed, we want to know the term. We have petitioners, they want to calculate their steps to know. So the state came with definition. They say, in fact, what we mean in mourning, when a person has ceremony, that during this ceremony, he or she turn their clothes and take their hairs like this out. So we said we want that to be registered in the protocol. And it was registered. So after it was registered, I said to my petitioners, you can do whatever you can do about the Nakba, because I believe that no one of you doing this ceremony. So in fact, this was a thing that the Netanyahu government, I think that this law is came to send the message that the Palestinian citizens of Israel are inferior in their citizenship. Because the state knew that they cannot use this law. You cannot take people and because they speak about their tragedy and sanction them. So this law is not used, but already send the message. It has double messages. That the Palestinian citizens of Israel are inferior in their status, and Jewish and democratic state doesn't go with the meaning of Nakba. This is what I tried to say. But of course, the consequences of the Nakba, if we are speaking that making the Palestinian as refugee, losing their property, losing their right of citizenship in their homeland, all of this package of laws speaking about that.
Other questions?
Can a non-citizen, can a non-Jewish citizen of Israel purchase property from either a Jew or a non-Jew living in that area? Is there, what I'm saying is it legal?
Yeah, you can buy property if you are citizen of Israel. You can. You can buy apartment and but the problem on property that because the establishment of the state came through taking the Palestinian refugee property, 93% of the land in Israel considered belong to the state. The state owned the land. Now, the state also has its partners. The Jewish Agency is partner of developing the land, and the Jewish National Fund also a partner of the state legally on developing the land. The Jewish National Fund owns 13% of the land in Israel, which was transferred from the state of Israel as state to the Jewish National Fund after the establishment of Israel. And this land, most of it belongs to the Palestinian refugees. Now, what kind of cases we have? When the state want to sell land, to allocate land for apartments, and these lands come together, the state and the Jewish National Fund, you as Palestinian, you will face problem. What's your problem will be? The Jewish National Fund will stand, will say, I am not the state. I am a Jewish National Fund. I was established for the Jewish people, not for the citizens of Israel. You are just citizen of Israel. I cannot serve you. You cannot buy from my land because my land was purchased and designated for the Jewish people. This is based on my internal regulations. And this, you have problem. Now, this woman with the red, her name Suhad Bshara, she is advocate in Adala. She submitted petition against this policy. When you submitted this petition? 2004. 2-3 days ago were written in one of the Israeli newspapers that this is the oldest pending case before Israeli Supreme Court. No one wants to decide this case. You know, so this is one of the problems. Like this cooperation creates exclusion. Now also there is a new law which called the selection committee laws. Also Suhad is challenging that. What this law said? This law said that small settlements inside Israel, inside the green line, which the number of the population of those settlements less than 500 persons, they will be allowed to decide who will live with them. So if you are a person want to purchase apartment in this settlement, there is committee and they will decide whether to grant you this right or not. Now what Suhad argued, Suhad said, but this land belongs, defined as land of the state. Land of the state should be open to all the citizens. Every citizen has the right to freedom to live wherever he or she wants. It cannot be given to small community. What the state argue in this case, they say multicultural rights. Every community has the right to keep its characters. If they want to to keep the Jewish religious aspect of their settlement, they are allowed not to accept secular. If they want to keep its Jewish secular aspect, they are allowed not to accept Palestinians. And of course, they don't have to discriminate, but this is part of our multicultural aspect. Now, everyone in Israel, the Israel liberals, were strongly against this law because they said this law came to exclude the Palestinian citizens of Israel. And like all the laws, many of the professors in Israel law schools signed petitions against this law as a racist law. Now we are waiting for the decision of the Supreme Court in this case, but this is one of the problems of when we speak about the definition of Israel as Jewish state, that some of the political group in Israel are not satisfied by the definition of Israeli Supreme Court, which I mentioned. The definition of Israeli Supreme Court about what's the meaning of Jewish and democratic state is considered the liberal definition of Israel as Jewish state. The other group, they want to make every piece in Israel as a Jewish. It's not enough to make the state as Jewish state on the meaning of Israeli Supreme Court, also to make the small settlements also Jewish state, like to Judaize specific territories. And this is the debate between Israel liberal Zionists and Israel right-wing. Israel liberals say Jewish state is all the state territory and everyone should be treated equally except the matter of citizenship and some of the territorial aspect for the right of return, but in other matters all of them should be treated equally. The right wing say, well, the war is not ended. And in the other word, they are saying the law is the continuation of 1948. And this is why we have to use the law in order to keep many, many places inside Israel as a Jewish. Like the sovereignty of the state is not enough on the territory. Also, the sovereignty should reach specific places. This is why in Israel there is something called unrecognized villages. There are villages, Bedouin villages, in the south. Their names is unrecognized villages. What does mean, unrecognized villages? They don't belong to any local council. Their name is not official name, and they are not in the map, but they are villages. When you don't recognize them and they don't belong to any local council, legally they are not entitled to social and economic rights. Even they are not entitled to have electricity, to be linked or connected to the water system, and so on and so on. This is part of controlling the land.
Just a quick question. Like, you spoke really nicely, and like you know Palestine much better than I think other people who are not familiar with the region. But I have a question regarding a statement you said, and hoping that you can clarify it. Is when you said that Arab states don't that the Palestinians are the only ones among the Arab nation that recognize Jews' right to self-determination.
Right.
Now, is that what do you mean by that statement?
Yeah. This is a great question. Thank you for that. Among the Arab nation, there is no discussion about the right of Israeli Jews for self-determination. There is no discussion about that. The only discussion was Israel took our land, took our Palestine, so this entity is illegitimate. I am speaking among the about the intellectuals and academics, not the states. Of course, Israel has agreement with Egypt and with Jordan. But among the population, among the people, among the nation, Israel is colonial state, took our homeland, so we cannot discuss their right for self-determination. Now, the Arab perspective and Israeli perspectives have similarity. What make the difference between them, the Palestinian citizens of Israel? The definition that I spoke about, Jewish and democratic state, negate the right of Palestinian people as natives for self-determination in their homeland in Palestine. The intellectuals, I want to speak in general terms, okay? The Arab intellectuals in the Arab world, they have similar perspective. Because they don't recognize the right or the existence of Israel, they don't accept that also in Israel there are Jews, that they are natives, were born, and Palestine speak Hebrew, and they are graves not just for Palestinians and also. So both sides, the Israeli negate the right of Palestinian natives, and the Arab nation doesn't want to see that Israel Jews became natives. Both of them has colonial perspective. The only one group that have different ways is the Palestinian citizens of Israel, maybe because of their experience. The Palestinian citizens of Israel make distinction between the rights of people and the legitimacy of the regime. I can say the Israeli legal regime is not legitimate in that because it discriminates strongly against the Palestinian and negates their rights and has strong colonial aspect. But at the same time, I say, but the people in Israel has full right for equality and self-determination. This distinction between people and regime, the Israelis cannot make. For the Israeli self-determination of Jews, meaning the state should be a Jewish state. Like they mix the regime, the character of the regime, with the right of the people. The Arab nation the same. When they say the regime is not legitimate, that means the people is not legitimate. I think the debate is so strong to reach the level that we cannot speak about this term, what we mean about the right of self-determination, unfortunately. So the Arab might be angry about that.
Yeah.
Another question.
Yes.
So you touched upon a lot of the different challenges and discrimination that Palestinian citizens of Israel face, and I'm wondering if you can talk about the priorities of Abdullah and how you select which issues you want to take on, and talk a little bit about the strategy of if you're working to bring some cases so that you then have precedent to bring others. So.
Thank you for this question. Speak about priority and legal strategy. Now, I thought once,
We are in a law school.
yeah, it was a time, we were in good time between the time of Oslo in the 90s, like Israeli governments had liberal ministers in that time. They didn't perceive their job description as to attack the rights of the Palestinians of Israel. So at that time, we had the privilege to put our strategy and to plan for the next 2-3 years, what cases we are going to take. Since 2000, we don't have the privilege to decide what is our plan for the next year. You put it, you discuss it, but you lose all the money of the retreats that you discuss that, because the government put for us the agenda. The Knesset put for us the agenda, not we. And this is like, I think this is characterize all the works of the human rights organization in Israel. If a human rights organization in Israel will tell you, I put my plan in advance and we had retreat and strategic planning, tell them that what you are saying that you don't answer the right needs. The right needs put by the government and you have to respond to that. You cannot decide that 2 years in advance. This is one of the problems. So we don't have this privilege. We don't have this privilege. Our cases was in the matter of planning, civil and political rights, social and economic rights, and prisoners. And we are lucky now that many of the prisoners are released through the negotiations. So this will ease the pressure on this matter. But in all the fields, almost in all the fields. We thought in the beginning that we will have the privilege, like in the multicultural states like in Canada or Switzerland, to start to raise cases about the Arabic language, the status of Arabic language. Right? Jamil Dakwar sit here. He brought one of the most important cases in Israel, that to ask to use the Arabic language in the traffic signs. He brought this case in 1998, 97. At that time, the traffic signs in the roads were in Hebrew and Latin, Latin meaning English, okay, was no Arabic. So he brought this case and he succeeded. And now if you enter Israel, you will see also Arabic language. And then he had the opportunity to take this case and to think about the next. But listen, he think immediately about 1999. 1999, he submitted another petition to ask that the mixed cities also to use Arabic language. What mixed cities? Tel Aviv, Jaffa, Lod, Ramle, Akko, all of those, and Natseret Alit, to use also Arabic language, and he succeeded. Now that time was a privilege for us to put strategies and to think about the group rights. Now we don't bring cases about the group rights. All of our cases, individual rights. Like we are defending the right of individuals because we are not in situation that Israel is state for all of its citizens, and now we are speaking about multiculturalism. We are still in the previous stage. Who is citizen? And when you're still discussing who is citizen, the right of the individuals under risk. So you don't know what kind of cases you will come, because the government might surprise you in many decisions.
My question for you is about, you were talking about how amongst Palestinians as a whole, there are these divisions between those inside of Israel, the occupied territories, the refugees. But I'm wondering if you can also talk about how the Israeli state differentiates between Palestinians inside of Israel, between Palestinians, Bedouins, Druze, etc., and how that plays out, and how Adala incorporates
Inside
it
Israel.
inside of Israel.
I told you that there are factors that your citizenship as Palestinian citizen of Israel is not a matter. For example, in territoriality, your situation will be similar to the status of Palestinian refugee who lives in Lebanon, in territoriality. Citizenship, you are similar to him just in the aspect of family unification. So there are groups called Druze. Druze also, they are Palestinian. They are about 5% of the Palestinian community in Israel. They serve in the army. Now the question, if they serve in the army and they are soldiers in the army, can their serving in the army give them the privilege not to be Palestinians in the aspect of citizenship and territoriality? No. If you are Palestinian Druze and serve in the army and you are pilot and attacking Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, and you want to have family unification to get married to Druze man from Lebanon, you won't have family unification. So despite the fact that you are soldiers and serving in the army, your Palestinianhood carried with you. If you are Bedouins, also some of the Bedouins serve in the army in Israel. Few. They are facing the same problem. The unrecognized villages, some of those unrecognized villages, people live there, they are soldiers. And all of their campaign, they say, but we are serving the state, we are in the army, why we are living in unrecognized villages? So now they found that this campaign and this advocacy of them, they are not gaining the Israeli public and they are losing their people. So they stopped using this terminology. Because by this terminology, me and Suad cannot support it. Like to be proud as Israeli soldiers. And the Israelis doesn't listen to them because of that. So in the end, the identity, you cannot make you flee from your identity. The latest interesting case came before Israeli Supreme Court by Israeli Jewish secular. He asked that in his ID to write nationality as Israel, not as a Jew. He said, I am Israeli citizen. There is state which called Israel. And if there is state called Israel, my nationality should be is Israel. And I should be identified in my ID not as a Jew or an Arab, because I am in my ID, my nationality are Arab. If you are a Jewish person, a Jew. If you are a Druze, they differentiate, they say Druze. All of us citizens of Israel, we have one nationality, we are Israeli. As the Americans are American, their nationality, and the French are French in their nationality, we have a state. This case was denied by Israeli Supreme Court. They said there is nothing called Israeli nationality. There is nothing called Israeli. There is state. A state for the Jewish people, but as nationality there is no. And this is the problem between nationality and citizenship in Israel. And this is why I was the only lawyer in the world, I think, who had to argue before 11 justices why to advocate for a state for all of its citizens is illegitimate. There is no lawyer in the world had this case. I had that privilege. No one argued, I think, in 21st century before any court, even before court of Saddam Hussein. I don't think that they will say that it's legitimate to claim that the state will be state for all of its citizens. So now you have the connection between them.
What is the legal background, if any, for having some groups like the Druze serve in the army? Now I understand the Christians, some of them want to serve. What, on what legal basis is this differentiation?
The law about serving in the army say every Israeli citizen, man and woman, should serve in the army. The law in its face doesn't make distinction between different nationalities or different religious groups. But the state doesn't exercise this law on the Arab except the Druze. Now, any Arab person who wants to be soldier, he has the opportunity to enter the army based on volunteering, and then he will have status of soldier. But the law, although the law in its face, speaking about all the citizens, it's not implemented to ask all the citizens to be in the army, including also the Haredim group. And now there is debate about that. So this issue all the time raised, who serve in the army, and you have many laws that lately that make connection between social and economic benefits and serving in the army, and to push different groups among the Arabs, like to serve in the army in order to fragment the population. But lately we had voices from the Druze community. The Druze community is the first community who was drafted in the 50s by their agreement and religious groups. And lately we had strong voices of academic Druze, intellectual Druze, and activists that calling not to serve in the army, because serving in the army not just didn't lead to equality, but also put barriers and walls between us and our nation. And we found ourselves, in fact, that the only group among the Palestinians that has the lowest percentage of education, the lowest percentage of academic, the lowest percentage of women in work, we are the Druze in Israel. We are the Druze in Israel if we compare ourselves to the Druze of Ramat HaGolan, what they called, which belong to the Syrian, which they are under Israeli occupation. We will find that in the Druze in Golan areas, the percentage of the educated, academic literacy, not educated, academic persons, freedom of women in aspect, access to work and others, cultural institutions will find that they having more rich cultural life than us, the Druze, the Palestinian Druze. Why this? Because what happened with this community, when they were drafted to the army, and I think they were drafted and they agreed because we are speaking about the 50s after the loss of the of the Arab nation. And the fear was a main factor. So it was easy to convince them through their religious groups to be in the army. Within the time, Israel started to put a special education system for them that they are Druze different than the Arab. Arabic for Druze, Hebrew for Druze, grammar for Druze, food for Druze. So now this identity cannot be an Arab identity. It's became just religious identity, because the only thing that makes this group is a group, not its Arab identity, but the Druze identity. So it's became more religious group. The only institutions that recognize religious institutions. Now the Druze in the Golan, they are nationalists. We are Syrians. We belong to the Arab nation. We want to keep. So they didn't limit their identity to religion, but to nationalism. Arab nationalism is more open than religious. If I am speaking in the name of Arab nationalism, I am saying we, the Christians, the Muslim, and the Druze, all of us are Arabs. If I speak in the name of the Muslim, I say we are just the Muslims. So this is why the Druze in the Syrian Druze under occupation, they have a richer cultural life than the Palestinian Druze who serve in the army, and maybe their economic situation better than the Druze. So serving in the army became a problem, not just moral aspect, also cultural, and how you can live in the Middle East within your nation.
Over here first.
Can you please talk about Jerusalem, particularly Adala's relationship to East Jerusalemites, considering the weird legal standing that they have? They're Palestinian and they also have rights, you know, and they have a card given by the State of Israel. So do you address that at all?
Yeah. Jerusalem was occupied in 1967 with the West Bank and Gaza. Based on international law, its status as occupied territory. But Israel, through its law, apply its laws in East Jerusalem and consider East Jerusalem as part of one city called Jerusalem, the big Jerusalem, and the capital of Israel. And this is why Israel law applied directly to East Jerusalem. Israel laws are not applied directly to Ramallah. Ramallah is under military regime, not the laws of the Knesset. So East Jerusalem considered legally part of Israel. But they didn't pass citizenization process. They don't have a status of citizen. They have status of permanent resident. Now, one of the cases in the 80s came before Israeli Supreme Court when Yitzhak Shamir decided to revoke a residency of Dr. Awad, one of the Palestinian academic in the 80s. He's American, Mubarak Awad. Mubarak Awad was advocate for two-state solution and asking the Palestinians, let us have a strategy of not armed struggle, non-violent strategy. Now Yitzhak Shamir perceived this struggle as threatening struggle. Non-violence and two states in that time is crazy. So he want to make for us peaceful intifada, we cannot accept peaceful intifada. So he decided to revoke his residency. And this is the first time that the Supreme Court had to discuss what that means, a Jerusalemite residency. Whether that means like similar to citizenship like me, that you cannot take it easily, or this is like residence, like any kind of residence that you give to tourists, that you can give it and take it back. So the Supreme Court gave a decision that the Prime Minister, Yitzhak Shamir, is allowed to revoke residency because residency, even that we are speaking about permanent residency, it doesn't have a status of citizenship. So if the state give it, the state can take it. But the state cannot take it in an arbitrary way. They can take it when one of the conditions will meet. One of the conditions, if you move your way of life or living out of Jerusalem. Meaning if you lived out of Jerusalem, for example, 5 years, that means that you change your place for life from Jerusalem to other place. And this doctor, Mubarak Awad, was living in America, so he doesn't live in Jerusalem, so it's allowed to take his residence. Now what happened, the justice who gave this decision, he thought that he is giving very liberal decision, put limitation on the state not to revoke residency easily. What happened in the 90s, this decision was given in 1988. In the 90s, the Ministry of Interior of Israel start to make transfer for the Palestinian of East Jerusalem based on this decision. Every student who came to US and start to study and left Jerusalem more than 5 years, when he come back, they take his ID. And now, this changing your place of life costs a lot of money for the people in Jerusalem. If I am working in Ramallah, in order, and my life really in Ramallah, because I am from Jerusalem, I live in Ramallah, work in Ramallah, and I have apartment. I bought apartment in Ramallah. I won't sell my apartment in Jerusalem or rent my apartment. I will continue to pay taxes in my apartment in Jerusalem and come every day in Jerusalem in order not to let the state. So this is the transfer of the people in East Jerusalem, and the numbers are huge. I don't remember, but I think if you enter the website of Bet Salem and the website of another organization called Hamoked, enter Jerusalem, you have the numbers that every year thousands of people who are losing their residency based on this position.
We had a question over here. Sir? Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Jabareen, about your lecture about this. I just want to ask you about the atmosphere that's surrounding Israel now, like the Arab Spring, and most of these peoples are fighting to bring a state, which is we know about, like the higher idea that we belong to states. Now, reading this, and listening to you about the Israeli code and Israeli politics, right wing, they are fighting backward, to get from the state ID to go back to the ethnicity and a sectarian group. How this fit in this, and how can this push to the Israeli state? And that would just confusing about how this So my question is how this the perspective of the Israeli citizens around and watching the Arabic changing, the Arabic Spring changes around. Does create any dialogue in the Israeli society or
No.
something?
No. No, didn't. The beginning about the Egypt, about Tahrir Square, it created debate, but normal debate, like here, like any debate in other country, but after that, no. The Israelis don't reach the question of what if we will be defeated in a war with the Arab world. This is a question they don't reach. And I say if you reach this question and change your imagination, it will easy to think rationally, I mean politically, to find solution. But you cannot imagine that. This is not part, the defeat is not part of the imagination. When you don't imagine the defeat, so this is why the right wing say, we continue in the war and we will win. This is why, you say, I don't understand the logic. Because they don't put the defeat as part of their political thought. Politics, as I understood, all the time is about not just victory, also imagining the defeat. Cost and benefits, win and lose. This is why we say politics about rationality, like pragmatism, because all the time you think about both sides. The Israeli politics doesn't imagine the defeat. One of the problems of the PLO, I think, that they just see the defeat. And this is why, Abu Mazen is ready for everything. Yalla, give me any state that you want. Because he say, well, we lost all the wars and we will continue to lose and we will never win. So this is this is why Israel government love the PA. One doesn't imagine the defeat and one just see the defeat. And politics about all the time, about both. Every state in the Middle East, whatever you can say, fanatic or not, whatever you can say about Iran, all of us knows that Iran manage irrational foreign policy because they have this normal political mentality, lose and win. In Israel, the politics, as the right, the left in Israel, they think in this term. The Israeli left think about the defeat in the meaning that if we continue with occupation, we'll lose. We'll lose because we will lose our opportunity to continue to be majority in the Green Line. The right wing doesn't see that, and this is why they say, we started in a war in 48, we continue in a war in 67, and we still continue in a war, and the war didn't end. So I have no reason to make distinction between 67 and 48. The Israeli liberals say, it was war in 48. We won that war. We have to keep this victory. And this is like how each group think. They think differently and about how to keep the achievements of 48. I am Israeli Zionist liberal. The most important thing for me to keep the achievements, the military achievements of 1948. I am Israel right wing. Most important thing for me to keep the achievements of 1967 war, because it's the continuation of 1948. You know, and here you can find the distinction between both sides.
I want to give you a rest.
I am happy.
But it's
I
getting
put
late.
me on. I can speak until tomorrow. You know, we are lawyers. We speak. You know.
That's right. No, but I think others are getting tired, and I want
Yeah, and
they,
I have
they're
to
too
go
polite
to eat.
to get up and leave.
Yeah, we have
a
to
few
go
of
to
them.
eat.
You surrender. Yeah. You can imagine defeat. Yeah. Should we do one more question and then repair to something else? Sir, one more question. Brief.
I just want to build up on non-violence and on this defeat concept. So what is happening with the BDS movement? How is that? It's a new challenge. It's a different kind of. So how will Israel legally try to deal with this?
Legally.
If they can.
Legal.
What is,
You have to say legal. I had this case last Sunday. Last Sunday, we had the case against the anti-boycott law. Israel passed a law in 2011 saying that any person who is calling for a boycott will face administrative and civil sanctions. Civil sanctions that every settler, for example, can sue you for his damages if you call for boycott. And administrative sanction that Israel won't give you if you are association, recognition of tax benefits, and other economic aspects. So this case was before 9 justices. This Sunday, the hearing was harsh, difficult. I was the leading lawyer in this case. And the court was interested in this very interesting question. The Israel Supreme Court justices have a very strong legal and political sense. They say it like this. We can, of course, we argue freedom of expression. This is our main argument. This is calling for boycott. It's part of political speech. And the case of occupation in Israel divided the society between left and right wing. So if I am calling as citizen for boycott, I am exercising my political speech, and the government cannot limit this right through regulations. So par excellence, freedom of expression. So the justices ask this. They say, let us imagine that there is no occupation. Does that mean boycotting Israel will be legitimate or illegitimate? I say, no, I don't understand what you mean. They said, let us agree that calling for boycott because of the cause of the occupation is legitimate. We may agree with you that to call for boycott because of the occupation of 1967 is legitimate because it's really divided the society between right wing and left. But what about calling for boycott on matters that has nothing to do with occupation? Isn't that about delegitimizing Israel as a state and you will reach anti-Semitism or not? This was major question of one of the smartest Justice Young who put that question. Then I say, Honor, yes, let us imagine that there is no occupation and tomorrow we have a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. And I can bring you many scenarios that justify politically to call for boycott, and we have to see it as part of free expression. They said, give me example. I said the foreign minister of Israel asked to transfer the Palestinian citizen in the triangle to other area. I think the leadership of the Palestinian citizen allowed to say politically that to call for boycotting Israel government and to say all the world must boycott this government because this government includes racist ministers. This has nothing to do with occupation. And then they raise the issue of academics, universities. And for them, it was one of the harsh things that to boycott academics. Then the answer was, okay, why people boycott academics? If American professor from NYU is invited to give lecture to university in Birzeit or Gaza, he won't be allowed in Gaza. Students from Gaza won't be allowed to leave Gaza to study in Birzeit University. And the universities in West Bank and Gaza, they don't have freedom like Tel Aviv University. I am a professor in NYU or in Columbia University. I don't want to give privilege to people who has privilege because of the occupation. So this is why I am boycotting, not because I am a racist person. In fact, because I am against colonialism, I am against occupation, and so on. So it was very interesting debate. We expect that this year the decision will be given. That, for your question, the state argued, what's their justification? They said, we as state facing serious problem from the BDS. We as state, when this law was enacted in 2011, we agree, this is the argument of the state. We agree that wasn't smart to enact this law. And maybe we thought not to defend this law before a few honor. Today, after 2 years, we tell you, Honor, that there is serious escalation. And we can give the justices of the Supreme Court data about many economic damages that happen to us, happen to banks, and. So they start to argue that, and of course their data, they are not lying. Their main argument that boycott caused serious damages of Israel, and this is why the state has the right, despite the right of freedom of expression, to defend itself, to use the law for as a mean to respond to this issue. So yes, lately it's a problem. It's a serious problem for the state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.